The sun was setting, her phone was dead, and she hadn't eaten in 2 days. She pushed herself up off the cold, hard ground and looked around wildly. Her eyes scanned the dark trees for any sign of life or sound, but there was nothing. Just the thick silence of the deep, foggy forest all around her, broken only by her own panicked breathing and the distant echo of a twig snapping somewhere in the underbrush. It felt like something was watching her. In today's video, we will see a woman who was left to die in the wilderness but refused to give up. Before we begin, please like this video. Her mind raced back to how she ended up here, lost and alone in the vast wilderness. Earlier that day, she had taken a wrong turn on a trail, leading her deep into the woods. Then her GPS device died, leaving her without any way to navigate out. With no cell service to call for help, she decided to hike to the top of a nearby hill, hoping to get a better signal. But instead found herself surrounded by thick fog, unable to see the trail or any landmarks. And now, as darkness fell, her hopes began to dwindle. There were dangers everywhere. The wildlife could hear her fear and come for her. She could twist an ankle and never get back. She was low on water, injured, and now it was getting cold. She shivered, pulling her thin jacket tighter around her body. The last thing she remembered was collapsing on this soft bed of leaves and snow. And now she couldn't remember anything else. Had she passed out? Was she hurt worse than she realized? Then she heard a strange noise, a low growl that seemed to come from the trees all around her. Whatever it was, it sounded big, predatory, and hungry. Fear shot through her, propelling her forward. She had to get away from whatever that was. Pushing aside the pain in her ankle, she stumbled onward. She needed to find shelter before nightfall. If she could just make it to morning, she could flag down a passing hiker or even start a fire to keep warm. But the forest seemed endless. The dense fog showed no signs of lifting, and the temperature continued to drop. She could feel her body starting to shut down. Soon, her vision blurred, and she collapsed onto the cold ground once more. The pain in her ankle flared. She cried out, the sound swallowed by the silent trees. As the world faded to black around her, she knew she might not wake up again. But deep in her heart, a small ember of hope still flickered. She refused to give up. Not yet, anyway. As the hours crawled by, strange noises filled the darkness around her. Every snap, crackle, and rustle made her jump. The wind whispered through the trees, sounding like voices calling her name. Shadows seemed to dance in her peripheral vision, just beyond her flashlight beam. Once she even swore she saw a pair of glowing eyes watching her from the trees. Now, she didn't know how long she'd been walking, but she was certain she was close to death. She could barely feel her fingers or toes anymore. Her body felt heavy like lead, and now exhaustion was starting to creep in. She tried to keep her eyes open, but they drooped lower and lower until finally she slipped into a restless sleep. As dawn broke, she awoke shivering in the growing darkness. The last thing she remembered was collapsing on this soft bed of leaves and snow. But when she tried to move, sharp pains shot through her leg. She cried out, pushing herself up on shaky arms. The world swam in front of her eyes. Had she passed out again? How long had she been here? Just then, she caught a glimpse of her own terrified face reflected in a nearby puddle. Her hair was matted with dirt and sweat, her clothes torn and bloody. Seeing her current state made her panic. She couldn't stay here. She had to keep moving. But each step sent searing pains shooting up her shin. Despite the agony, she forced herself forward. She had to get out of this forest even if it meant dragging herself along the ground. After what felt like hours, she spotted something in the distance, a flicker of light between the trees. Hope surged through her. She stumbled toward it, calling out for help, though she wasn't sure anyone could hear her over the rushing water. When she finally reached the edge of the trees, she gasped. In front of her lay a wide, rushing river, its surface churning and frothing. There was no bridge and the banks were too slippery to climb. Looking back, she saw the dense trees of the forest, the same ones she had been walking in for days. They offered no way out. Ahead lay the rushing river, which she couldn't cross, and behind her was the path she had already walked, offering nothing but more of the same. Her heart sank. Was this it? Had she been walking all this time for nothing? Was she really trapped here forever? Then she noticed something on the opposite bank, a trail marker pointing downriver. Maybe if she could just follow the trail, she would eventually find a road or maybe another hiker who could help her. With renewed determination, she limped down to the river's edge. She had to get across somehow. Glancing back, she saw a large, fallen log that stretched across the water. It looked sturdy enough to support her weight. Taking a deep breath, she began to cross. But halfway over, the log lurched, nearly sending her sprawling into the churning water below. Instinctively, she grabbed onto a protruding root. Her fingers slipped on the wet bark. She dangled precariously over the raging river. Her heart pounded. With a Herculean effort, she pulled herself onto the log. Shaking and exhausted, she collapsed onto the muddy bank. As she sat there catching her breath, she noticed a faint glow in the distance, like sunlight reflecting off water. Could it be? With renewed hope, she stumbled toward the light, pushing through the pain in her leg, ignoring the scratches and bites from insects and the prick of thorns. She had to keep going. She had come too far to give up now. Finally, the light grew brighter. When she crested the last rise, she gasped. Before her lay a beautiful mountain lake sparkling in the morning sun. But that wasn't what had caught her eye. On the far shore stood a lone figure waving frantically. Someone was there. Finally, someone to help her. With a burst of energy, she limped down to the lake's edge. Scrambling onto a flat rock, she called out, "Help me, please. Can someone hear me?" The figure on the other side waved again, then began to walk away. Disappointment washed over her. Had she imagined it? Was she really alone? Just then, the figure turned and began to run back toward her. Relief flooded through her. He was coming to help her. As he drew closer, she saw that he was young, maybe a teenager, with tousled brown hair and kind eyes. "Please, help me," she cried, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I need your help. I'm hurt." The boy nodded, understanding dawning on his face. He ran over and gently helped her to her feet. Together, they limped along the lake shore until they found a patch of dry grass. Sitting down, she finally allowed herself to cry. Tears streamed down her face as the boy fetched her some water. "You need to drink," he said softly, handing her the canteen. She took a few sips, then leaned back, closing her eyes. "I'm so tired," she whispered. The boy looked at her, concern etched on his youthful face. He didn't say anything but simply stayed by her side, keeping watch. As the minutes passed, her eyelids grew heavy. She snuggled deeper into the soft grass, feeling safer with the boy there beside her. Finally, his soothing presence and the warmth of the sun lulled her back into a peaceful sleep. When she awoke, she felt something different, something that startled her. She opened her eyes, expecting to see the same forest, but instead found herself lying on a soft bed of leaves and pine needles. Above her, sunlight filtered through the branches of towering trees. Birds sang sweetly in the distance, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. All around her, peace and tranquility prevailed. But what truly captured her attention was the sight of a dirt road just a few steps away. Relief washed over her. She was near civilization. She could get help here. Recovering from her ordeal, she struggled to her feet. The boy was gone, but his kindness lingered in her memory. As she stepped onto the road and started walking, she knew she would never forget her experience in the woods. The fear, the loneliness, the desperation, but also the kindness of a stranger. It had changed her in ways she couldn't have imagined. And that is the story of the woman who was left to die in the wilderness but refused to give up. Please like this video for the algorithm. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.